Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The hospital corridor erupted into chaos the moment Nick Newman was rushed through the emergency doors, blood soaking the front of his shirt, his body limp as paramedics shouted for a trauma bay. Sharon's scream sliced through the air, raw and desperate, while Noah, pale but steady, pushed through the swarm of doctors insisting he be allowed to help, insisting they take him to the lab now. Nick had been shot, an ambush, a blur of gunfire, a moment Sharon replayed over and over in her mind as she clutched her arms to her chest. Noah barely had time to process any of it. All he knew was that his father, the man he had always believed was his father, the man whose approval and respect he had spent his whole life chasing, was dying. The surgeons shouted that Nick had lost too much blood, that they needed an immediate compatible donor, and before anyone else could step forward, Noah volunteered, breathless but resolute. They whisked him away, stuck needles in his arms, drew his blood, cross-matched it, and began prepping him for an emergency transfusion. As Noah lay there feeling the blood drain from him and get funneled toward the father he'd always admired, he whispered, "Just save him. Take whatever you need." It was the most natural instinct, save Nick first, ask questions later. But destiny has a way of cracking open truths at the precise moment they are least welcome, and today it chose to do it in the most devastating way imaginable. While Sharon paced the waiting room with trembling hands, a doctor emerged, not with news about Nick's surgery, but with a question iced with confusion. "Mrs. Newman, we're having trouble with the transfusion. There's a mismatch in the DNA markers. We ran it twice." Sharon blinked, stunned, assuming she misheard. A mismatch? But Noah was Nick's son, how could there be a mismatch? The doctor tried again, carefully, as if speaking too fast might shatter someone. "The blood types are compatible enough to use in an emergency, but the genetic markers, they don't match father-to-son patterns. Not even close." Sharon felt her knees weaken, the floor tilt, her pulse hammer in her ears. There must be a mistake," she insisted. "Nick is Noah's father." The doctor looked at her with gentle but unmovable eyes. "Genetically, he isn't." The words were quiet but catastrophic. Sharon staggered back as if struck. The truth punched the air out of her lungs as memories, foggy, buried ones she had forced into the darkest corners, began to resurface with startling clarity. While Nick fought for his life in surgery, Noah remained in the donor bed, exhausted but hopeful, unaware of the bomb detonating outside his room. As the doctors completed the transfusion and stabilized Nick enough for surgery to proceed, Sharon stumbled into the hallway and pressed a hand over her mouth, trying not to scream. Every wall of the hospital seemed to close in around her as she whispered, "Oh God, no, not now," but fate didn't care. Fate never cared. When the doctor repeated the results a third time, Sharon nearly collapsed. "This transfusion, it's saving Nick's life. But it has also revealed something else," he said gently. "The DNA inconsistency is definitive." Those words carved a canyon through her heart. A definitive inconsistency. A scientific confirmation. A truth she had once convinced herself she imagined, prayed she never had to face again. Sharon felt the weight of her past crush down upon her, the reckless choices, the trauma, the forgotten nights when she was broken and vulnerable and didn't know which way was up. Because deep down, in a place she never allowed herself to acknowledge, she had feared this exact outcome. By the time Noah returned to the waiting area, weak but relieved, Sharon stared at him with swollen eyes, torn between love and terror. His relief instantly vanished. "Mom? What happened? Is Dad okay?" he asked. Sharon tried to speak, but the words tangled around her tongue, her breath catching in her throat. "The transfusion worked," she managed. "They're operating now." Noah exhaled, but his mother's expression didn't soften. It only grew heavier. "There's something else, something you need to hear," she whispered. Noah frowned, stepping closer. "What is it?" Sharon stepped back, as if afraid touching him would make the truth more real. There was a mismatch," she said, voice cracking. With the blood tests. Noah gave a small confused laugh. A mismatch? But I have Dad's blood type. They used it, didn't they? Sharon nodded, tears gathering. Yes. They did. But the DNA markers, her voice broke completely. Noah froze. Mom, what are you saying? He asked, his chest tightening, heat flooding his face. Sharon wiped at her cheeks, shaking her head as if that might stop the truth from spilling out. The tests show you're not Nick's son, she whispered. The world didn't just stop, it fell apart. Noah's expression flickered from confusion to disbelief to horror. That's impossible, he said sharply. Of course I'm his son. Of course. Sharon cried harder. I'm so sorry, she whispered, and those 3 words cut him deeper than any wound. Noah staggered back, gripping the wall, trying to pull air into lungs that refused to work. The hallway spun, the fluorescent lights blurring as he felt his identity crack down the middle. Everything he ever believed, every memory, every fight, every moment he stood in Nick's shadow, trying to earn respect that always felt out of reach, suddenly felt like a lie. No, he repeated, harsher now, as if volume might rewrite reality. There's no way. But Sharon, trembling, forced herself to look him in the eyes. There is something you don't know, she confessed. Something I should have told you years ago. Something I tried to forget because I didn't want to hurt you, or Nick. Noah's heart hammered against his ribs. Mom, tell me. Tell me right now. She swallowed hard. When you were conceived. I wasn't in a good place. I was confused. I didn't know who I could trust. I didn't know which memories were real. And there was someone else, someone from before Nick and I found our way back together. Noah's stomach dropped. Someone else? Sharon nodded, sobbing. There is a chance, no, a certainty, that Nick isn't your biological father. The door to the operating room swung open then, making both Sharon and Noah jump. A nurse stepped out to update them. Nick was stable for now. But the relief that should have washed over them never came. Instead, a chasm opened, one deeper and more painful than either expected. Noah tried to breathe, but everything felt surreal, as if he were watching someone else's world implode. So what now? He whispered. Sharon gently reached for him, but he jerked away, shaking his head violently. No. Don't. He felt betrayed, humiliated, shattered. My whole life, you let me believe he was my father. You let him believe it. The truth sliced Sharon open. I didn't know for certain, she pleaded. I didn't want to break the family apart. I thought it didn't matter as long as Nick loved you. But Noah couldn't hear past the roaring in his ears. It matters now, he shouted, startling nurses nearby. It matters because that blood test just told the world I don't belong to him. I don't belong to anyone. Sharon shook her head fiercely. No, that's not true. You belong to me. And Nick, Noah cut her off. Nick isn't my father, he choked out, voice shaking with agony. And now he almost died thinking I was his son. As Noah stormed down the hallway, Sharon broke completely, her hands shaking as she pressed them to her face. The hospital lights flickered against her tears as she realized that the truth she buried had finally resurfaced, and it had done so at the worst possible moment, blowing her family apart in one catastrophic instant. Inside the operating room, Nick fought for his life, unaware that the revelation waiting for him when he woke up would forever alter his relationship with the son he raised, loved, and defended. The transfusion that saved his life had also exposed a truth sharp enough to cut through decades of history. He's not your son. 3 words that threatened to destroy everything. Meanwhile, Noah fled to the far end of the hospital, stumbling into an empty family lounge, gripping the edge of a table as he fought back tears. His mind replayed every moment he ever wondered why he and Nick felt different. Why their bond often felt strained. Why he was never enough. Now, suddenly, there was an explanation, a cruel one. His identity fractured as he whispered, if he's not my father, then who is? The question hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. Because the answer wasn't just a name. It was a looming storm, one that had been brewing for decades in the darkest corners of Sharon's past. And that storm was about to hit all of Genoa City. The hospital grew eerily quiet as the hours stretched on, though the storm brewing inside the Newman family only intensified. Sharon found herself drifting between Nick's recovery room and the empty hallway where Noah had disappeared, torn between her son who had just had his world ripped apart and the man fighting for his life behind closed doors. Every time she lifted her hand to knock on Nick's door, her pulse thundered with fear of what she would have to tell him when he finally opened his eyes. Because sooner or later, the truth would come clawing its way out. It already had, in the most devastating way possible. And now Sharon had to face the consequences she spent half her life running from. Inside the hospital lounge, Noah sat frozen, staring at the wall without blinking, the echo of Sharon's confession pounding inside his skull. There was someone else. Those 4 words replayed 1,000 times, growing sharper with every cycle. Someone else. Someone she hadn't named. Someone whose existence rewrote everything Noah believed about himself. The clock ticked loudly overhead, each click like a hammer chipping away at the identity he once carried with pride. All the years he stood beside Nick, thinking he was carrying on the Newman legacy, suddenly felt stolen. Fabricated. A lie woven into his entire existence. His hands trembled as he dragged them through his hair, wishing he could rip the truth out of his brain. Wishing he could reverse time, go back to before the transfusion, before the gunshot, before everything imploded. But he couldn't. And the devastation was suffocating. His thoughts spiraled. If Nick wasn't his father, then who was? Could it have been someone dangerous? Someone she feared? Someone from the darker periods of her life? The gaps in Sharon's past suddenly became monstrous. Noah could no longer avoid the cold truth. The answers he wanted were buried in the parts of his mother's history she spent decades locking away. Now that the lock was broken, he felt like he was staring into a bottomless pit. And he had to decide if he was ready to climb down and confront what might live inside. Sharon tried calling him repeatedly, but each call went unanswered. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass window, watching morning light creep over Genoa City, a new day dawning while her family was collapsing. She knew she had to find Noah, but Nick was still unconscious, and the guilt of leaving either of them tore at her. She moved mechanically into Nick's room, the machines humming steadily beside him. His face was pale, lips dry, but he was alive because Noah had given his blood. The irony was suffocating. The son who wasn't biologically his had saved him, only to learn the truth in the cruelest moment possible. When Nick finally stirred, groaning through the haze of anesthesia, Sharon's heart caught in her throat. His eyes fluttered open, and confusion washed across his face as he tried to orient himself. "Sharon," he whispered. She immediately reached for his hand. "I'm here," she said softly. "You're okay. You were shot but the doctors, they saved you." Nick took a slow breath, winced in pain, then squeezed her hand weakly. "Noah, is he okay?" Sharon froze. Her heart cracked open again. She swallowed hard. "He's physically okay," she said carefully. Nick frowned, sensing her hesitation. "What does that mean? Did something happen to him? Did the shooter get to him too?" Sharon shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "Not like that," she whispered. "There's something we need to talk about." Nick blinked, his gut twisting. "Sharon, what is it?" he asked, the dread creeping into his voice. Before she could speak, the doctor entered with charts in hand. "Good to see you awake, Nick," he said. "We want to give you a bit more time before addressing everything tonight, but there is one thing you should know." Sharon stiffened, panic flashing across her face. "Doctor, maybe we can wait," but Nick held up a hand. "Just tell me." The doctor exhaled slowly. "You received a blood transfusion that was crucial to saving your life. It came from Noah." Nick's eyes softened, gratitude filling them. "He gave blood for me?" The doctor nodded. "He did. But the lab results showed something unexpected. The DNA markers don't align. Nick stared at the doctor blankly, confusion knitting his brow. What are you talking about? The doctor hesitated only briefly. Genetically, he isn't your biological son. The room went dead silent. Nick turned to Sharon slowly, as if her face might hold a different answer. But the horror in her eyes only confirmed it. His breath hitched. Sharon, tell me he's lying. Sharon shook her head helplessly. I'm so sorry, Nick's mind reeled. The pain from the bullet wound suddenly felt insignificant compared to the grenade that just exploded in his chest. I don't understand, he said, his voice breaking. Noah is my son. I raised him. I held him when he was born. He called me Dad. Sharon sobbed softly. I know. And you've always been his father. But biologically, the test is accurate. Nick's hand trembled as he dragged it down his face. So what? You cheated on me? Sharon flinched. Nick, it's not that simple. But he snapped his gaze to her, eyes blazing with betrayal. Then make it simple. Explain it. Tell me how I raised a boy who wasn't even mine. Sharon's tears spilled over. It wasn't like that. When I got pregnant with Noah, I wasn't in a clear state of mind. I was dealing with trauma, confusion, memories I didn't even know were real. I wasn't sure, Nick cut her off, anger surging. You weren't sure who his father was? And you never told me? Sharon's voice broke. I didn't want to lose our family. I didn't want Noah to grow up feeling unwanted or confused. And you loved him. He loved you. I thought the truth didn't matter. Nick shook his head in disbelief. Didn't matter? Sharon, the kid just found out in the middle of a crisis that I'm not his father. That matters. His voice cracked as he whispered, I deserve to know. Sharon couldn't argue. She couldn't defend herself. All she could do was cry quietly, shoulders trembling. The doctor excused himself, sensing the emotional explosion about to rip apart the room. Nick leaned back against the pillows, breathing hard, trying to process something too overwhelming to comprehend. Where is he? Nick finally asked. Where's Noah? Sharon wiped her eyes. He needed space. He's devastated. Nick closed his eyes, pain slicing through him, not physical pain, but the kind that rewrites a man's entire world. Meanwhile, Noah had slipped out of the hospital unnoticed. He walked through the quiet streets of Genoa City, barely aware of where he was going. His feet carried him on instinct, his mind in a fog of denial and heartbreak. How many times had he said Dad with pride? How many times had he compared himself to Nick, his strength, his sense of justice, his protective instincts? All those moments now felt stolen. He ended up at the Newman Ranch without fully realizing it, staring at the front door he had walked through 1,000 times. But now it felt foreign. Distant. As if it belonged to a world he no longer had a place in. He hesitated only a moment before pushing inside. Victoria, seated by the fireplace, looked up in surprise. Noah? You look pale. What's wrong? But when she saw his expression, broken, hollow, her heart dropped. Noah, what happened? He shook his head, unable to speak at first. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, He's not my father. Victoria blinked, confused. What? Noah swayed as he spoke. Nick. The blood test. The transfusion. The DNA, it said he's not my father. Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh my God, Noah laughed bitterly. Yeah. That was pretty much my reaction too. She rushed to him, putting a gentle hand on his shoulder. I'm so sorry. Noah shook his head violently. Don't. Please don't. I can't hear that right now. His voice cracked with raw pain. I don't even know who I am anymore. Victoria guided him to sit down. Have you talked to your mom? Noah's jaw clenched. She knew something. Maybe not everything, but enough. And she said nothing. Victoria sighed deeply, anger and sympathy mixing. Sharon was always trying to protect you. But she should have told you. Should have told Nick. Noah stared at the fire, losing himself in the flicker of the flames. He almost died thinking I was his son, he whispered. Now he'll wake up, and everything between us is ruined. Back at the hospital, Nick struggled to breathe evenly as the emotional blow continued to tear through him. The man who built his identity on being a good father was suddenly stripped of one of the most important relationships of his life. I need to see him, Nick finally said, voice hoarse. Sharon nodded quickly. I'll find him. But Nick grabbed her wrist weakly. Alone, he insisted. I need to talk to my son. Biological or not. Sharon nodded, guilt pressing on her chest like a weight. But when she returned to the lounge, it was empty. Noah was gone. Nick waited for hours, staring at the door, willing Noah to walk through it. He rehearsed what he'd say. How he'd tell him that biology didn't matter. That he was, and always would be, his son. But Noah didn't return. Not that night. Not even the next morning. Because by the time the sun rose again, Noah wasn't just seeking space. He was seeking the truth. Noah didn't sleep. He didn't even try. The moment he slipped out of the Newman ranch, the cold early morning air hit his face like a slap, snapping him into a clarity that bordered on dangerous. He needed answers, real ones, not the foggy half-truths that lived in Sharon's silences. Not the assumptions he'd built his entire life upon. He deserved to know where he came from, and who had given him life. And if Sharon wouldn't tell him, then he'd dig until he found it himself. He drove aimlessly at first, barely aware of the streets he turned down, until muscle memory carried him to the one place he swore he wouldn't go, the cottage where he grew up. Sharon's cottage. The center of his childhood. The place where love lived alongside secrets. He parked across the street, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He wasn't ready to face her again. Not yet. The wound was too fresh, too raw. But he needed some